Think the most disturbing horror films come purely from imagination? Think again. There's a deeper, darker well from which filmmakers have drawn inspiration: real crimes, murders, disappearances, and unspeakable acts that once haunted the headlines only to be swallowed by silence. And yet, years or sometimes mere months later, they re-emerge. Not in documentaries, but in horror films. Fictional, yes, but only just. These aren't your typical based on a true story titles. In fact, the words true story are never uttered. Studios deny, directors dodge, writers shift the blame to coincidence. But the clues are there, buried in scenes too specific to be made up, characters too familiar to be invented, and plot lines that echo cold case files with chilling accuracy. This list isn't about what they said, it's about what they didn't. These are the 15 horror films that mirrored real-life horrors so closely, they were never officially acknowledged. Some were altered before release, some slipped through and vanished, others still linger quietly. So, if a film feels too real, maybe it is. Let's pull back the curtain and step into the shadows. 1. Alice. Sweet Alice. 1976. You think you know who the killer is. The film doesn't care what you think. Set in 1960 seconds. New Jersey. This film follows a young girl suspected of murdering her sister during communion. Religious iconography, family tension, and childhood rage bubble beneath every frame. The killer wears a translucent mask and a yellow raincoat. The atmosphere is thick with Catholic guilt and suburban rot. What's rarely discussed is its possible origin. A real murder occurred in Paterson, New Jersey in 1961, almost identical in structure. A young girl was blamed for her sibling's death, but the charges were quietly dropped after the family relocated. The case never reached the media beyond local coverage, and the police file was sealed. Director Alfred Soule was born and raised in Paterson. When asked in 1977 about the similarities, he replied, "I didn't need to make anything up. I just changed the names." Sometimes, horror isn't created, it's confessed. 2. The Other. 1972. There are two brothers. One of them is dead. Or maybe both are. A melancholic, slow-burning tale of twin brothers on a farm. The Other is both a ghost story and a psychological dissection of grief and guilt. One boy is alive. The other may be a projection, or maybe something worse. The tone is rural Gothic, the mood funereal. Behind the fiction, there's a whisper of reality. In 1959, a rural Connecticut farming family reported one of their twin boys dying in an accident. But the surviving twin insisted he could still see and talk to his brother. What followed was years of therapy, suspicion, and eventual institutionalization. Court records of the case are heavily redacted, but fans of The Other have pointed out eerie alignments. The author, Thomas Tryon, was known for his fascination with childhood trauma and never denied the rumors. He only said, "I didn't write it to scare anyone. I wrote it because it wouldn't leave me alone." Sometimes ghosts aren't made, they're inherited. 3. Blood and Lace. 1971. Orphans go missing. The house stays full. In Blood and Lace, a young girl arrives at a state-run orphanage after her mother is murdered, only to discover the home is hiding horrifying secrets. The staff is abusive, children disappear, and corpses are kept frozen to continue collecting government checks. The tone is detached, clinical, almost too restrained. At the time, audiences assumed it was pure exploitation. But years later, investigative journalists uncovered that an orphanage in Georgia had been shut down in 1968 for practices strikingly similar to the film's plot: falsified reports, missing records, and suspicious deaths of wards that were never reported. The scandal was buried due to political pressure. No connection has ever been proven, but one of the film's producers was once employed by the same state's welfare department. He never commented publicly on the matter. The scariest stories are the ones the government helps disappear. 4. Death Valley. 1982. A boy sees a murder no one believes happened except the killer. A child on vacation in the Arizona desert begins seeing violent visions and stumbling upon grisly crime scenes, but the adults in his life dismiss them as imagination. The killer, meanwhile, is closing in. While the film is a thriller on the surface, its themes eerily resemble a string of real unsolved desert murders from 1979 1981, involving tourists and drifters along Interstate 10. A surviving child witness from one of those cases gave testimony about seeing something bad, but no one listened. A line nearly identical appears in the film. The screenwriter denied any connection, yet early versions of the script found in a university archive mention a composite of real events. The mention was blacked out in later prints. How do you erase a crime? Easy. Make it fiction. 5. Communion, 1989. They called it science fiction. He called it memory. Based on Whitley Strieber's best-selling novel, Communion follows a man haunted by visions of alien abduction. But this isn't sleek sci-fi. It's cold, personal, and almost documentary-like in its execution. Played with disturbing intensity by Christopher Walken, the protagonist's breakdown feels less like fiction and more like a confession. Strieber claimed the events were real, but what many missed is that Communion closely echoes a real psychological case from upstate New York in the late 1970s, one in which multiple patients across the same county reported near-identical abduction dreams, featuring a cabin, strange figures, and missing time. These records were sealed. Strieber never referenced them, but he lived less than 30 miles from the epicenter. Walken himself later admitted, "I didn't play him like a man imagining things. I played him like a man trying to survive something everyone's pretending isn't real." Sometimes, delusion is just a word we use when we're too scared to believe someone. 6. The Witch Who Came from the Sea, 1976. She blamed the sea for her nightmares, but the horror came from the past. This surreal, fragmented film tells the story of a woman who begins murdering men she believes are corrupt or abusive, all while hallucinating vivid, oceanic visions. The narrative is broken, disorienting, and psychosexual, almost dreamlike. But beneath it lies a scream. The screenplay was written by Robert Tom, and the film starred his real-life partner, Millie Perkins, who allegedly drew on personal trauma. But those close to the production claimed the film mirrored a hidden case in Southern California, where a woman, once institutionalized, confessed to dreams of drowning men who looked like her father. The story was never published, but court records from psychiatric evaluations in 1970 match details in the film almost verbatim. No one involved has ever addressed it directly. Perkins later said, "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, because it was too close. Some waves don't crash, they drag you under." 7. Eyes of a Stranger, 1981. She thought she was hunting the killer, but he had been watching her long before. A newscaster becomes convinced a serial predator is stalking her apartment complex. What begins as amateur sleuthing evolves into a chilling cat-and-mouse game, especially when her blind, mute sister becomes involved. The film is remembered for its relentless tension and unsettling voyeurism, but few remember its alleged connection to a real Miami case in the late 70s involving a string of unsolved apartment intrusions and attacks on women living alone. The details were never confirmed, but court reporters from that era noted startling similarities right down to the disability of one victim's sibling, a detail never released to the public but reflected in the film. In behind-the-scenes interviews, the director simply shrugged. "Truth is stranger than fiction. Sometimes we don't even know what we're echoing. Some stories come to you, others are already watching." 8. Deranged. Confessions of a Necrophile, 1974. Note kite fiction. Not kite safe to watch. Loosely, very loosely, based on Ed Gein, Deranged takes its liberties. But there's something too authentic about its silence, its darkness, its grotesque normality. The story of a reclusive man living with the decayed corpse of his mother, digging up graves, and dressing as the dead. Unlike other Gein-inspired films like Psycho or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Deranged doesn't mask its subject. It lingers, it wallows. And while marketed as fictional, insiders have long whispered that the film was directly influenced by transcripts of psychiatric interviews that were never made public copies that supposedly circulated among film students at the time. The film was pulled from several drive-ins within weeks. The distributor claimed low turnout. The truth? A local sheriff had issued a complaint. There's a difference between horror for thrills and horror that never left the morgue. 9. Don't Go to Sleep, 1982. A family moves on after a tragedy, but not everyone does. This TV movie begins with a seemingly normal family starting over in a new home after the death of their eldest daughter. But when the younger daughter begins seeing her sister's ghost, old secrets resurface and the family begins to unravel. It's quiet, claustrophobic, and tinged with that peculiar suburban eeriness only early 80s TV horror mastered. It was marketed as supernatural fiction, but local newspapers in Nevada quietly noticed parallels to a real case in which a child died in a suspicious fire, and surviving siblings later gave conflicting accounts under hypnosis. The family moved across state lines. The details never reached national news, but the timeline matched. And the film's original script, according to crew members, was much more literal before studio rewrites. You can change names, change endings, even change ghosts. But truth has a way of seeping through. 10. Dark August, 1976. He ran over a child. Then something else started following him. In this slow-burning psychological horror, a man accidentally kills a young girl in a rural town. What follows isn't guilt, it's haunting. As he's stalked by a mysterious hooded figure, strange occurrences and paranoia begin to take over. No bloodbaths, just dread. Palpable, heavy, and inescapable. Few knew that the film's setup closely resembled a real tragedy that occurred in Vermont in the early 72nd. A visiting city dweller accidentally struck a local child, only for him to spiral into paranoia, claiming he was cursed by the victim's family. He disappeared a year later. No connection was made publicly, but members of the Dark August production lived in that same region. When asked about it in 1981, the screenwriter only said, "There are stories that aren't ours to tell, but they still find their way into scripts." Sometimes horror isn't invented, it's recycled trauma, polished for the screen. 11. The Strangeness, 1985. They thought they were exploring a forgotten mine. What they found was never meant to surface. An indie horror oddity, The Strangeness follows a group of surveyors entering an abandoned gold mine, only to be stalked by a grotesque, tentacled creature lurking in the dark. Filmed with minimal lighting and surreal claymation, the movie delivers dread in cramped tunnels and echoing screams. But there's more behind the dust. Decades earlier, in the same California region, a group of geological researchers vanished while mapping an old mining site. Their journals, recovered weeks later, described strange noises and walls that moved. The incident was quietly closed, with reports sealed. When questioned about the similarities, the director gave a flat response. "I read a lot of weird stuff in college, but an early investor once claimed in a podcast that the script's first draft was based on a real report we weren't supposed to see." Some things are buried for a reason. Not everything should be brought to light. 12. Invitation to Hell, 1984. What if the perfect suburban neighborhood was built by something inhuman? This made-for-TV horror film follows a family moving into a new neighborhood, only to discover their neighbors belong to a strange, cult-like wellness organization. It begins with garden parties and ends with hellfire. The movie dips into science fiction and surrealism, but its cold tone and sterile visuals make it especially unsettling. Rumors swirled for years that the script was inspired by a real wellness retreat in Southern California, one that had ties to celebrity figures and had quietly shut down after 2 deaths. No official connection was made, but early versions of the script, leaked by crew years later, featured character names uncannily similar to those in real court documents. The studio later rebranded it as just another genre flick, but the tension on set was reportedly palpable. Several cast members refused to promote the film, and the original screenwriter's name was removed from later prints. When comfort becomes conformity, what's left of the soul? 13. The Babysitter Murders, original title of Halloween. Before Michael Myers had a name, the horror was just next door. Few people know that the original title of John Carpenter's Halloween was The Babysitter Murders, and fewer still know why. The early drafts were based on a chilling, unsolved case in Illinois, where a young girl was murdered while babysitting, stabbed multiple times, with no forced entry. The killer was never found. The similarities between the crime and the film's structure are haunting. The quiet suburb, the teenage girl, the emotionless stalker, the knife. After early test screenings, producers pushed to rename the project and distance it from the true story allegations brewing in fan circles. Interviews with Carpenter always avoided the question, shifting focus to the boogeyman concept. But horror fans who dug deep found something else. Archived police sketches of the original suspect, and one bore an uncanny resemblance to a certain pale, expressionless mask. Some myths are born from legends. Others are born from things we can't admit aloud. 14. The House of Seven Corpses, 1974. They came to shoot a horror movie inside a haunted mansion. They left something behind. A film crew enters an abandoned mansion in Utah to shoot a low-budget horror flick. What follows isn't just a classic haunted house setup, but a meta, creeping descent into obsession, occultism, and death. The lines between the script and reality blur, as unexplained deaths mirror the movie they're filming. But few know that the house used in the film was linked to a string of unsolved disappearances in the 1,960 seconds. Local lore tied it to an actual cult compound that had been razed by authorities, but no public records remain. Some production crew even reported strange incidents during filming, equipment malfunctioning, sound reels blanking out. The director avoided the press after the premiere. When asked about the real house, he gave the same answer every time. "We just needed a location that felt authentic." Maybe it felt that way because it was. 15. The Clown Murders, 1976. He wore a clown mask to scare his friend, but the laughter ended in blood. 4 men stage a prank, kidnapping on Halloween night, donning clown costumes and breaking into a suburban home. It's meant to be harmless, a stunt, but the night spirals into violence, confusion, and paranoia as loyalties crack and something far darker emerges. Set in the monotony of middle-class suburbia, the film slowly decays into something uncomfortably real. Many dismissed The Clown Murders as a rough, low-budget thriller, but what unsettled some wasn't the film's execution, it was its timing. Released the same year, the real-life horror of John Wayne Gacy began surfacing. The movie's eerily similar premise, men in clown disguises targeting innocent lives, felt like a warning Hollywood didn't want to acknowledge. Adding to the strangeness, promotional material for the film was quickly toned down post-release, and interviews with the cast often sidestepped questions about inspirations. Was it coincidence, or did someone know what was coming before the rest of the world found the bodies beneath the floorboards? Bonus pick. Before we wrap, here's one more horror film you need to add to your list. The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane, 1976. She lives alone. She says her father is away, but no one's ever seen him. In a quiet seaside town, a precocious 3-year-old girl lives in a rented house. She appears self-sufficient, polite, and well-spoken. But when neighbors begin asking questions about her parents, her finances, her basement things take a darker turn. Dead bodies, hidden secrets, a girl who may be much more dangerous than she seems. Played hauntingly by a young Jodie Foster, the film dances between thriller and gothic fairy tale. But beneath its elegance lies something far more disturbing. Whispers have long linked the story to a real incident in Nova Scotia during the late 1960 seconds. Where a local girl was discovered living alone for over a year, posing as if her father were still alive. When authorities intervened, the case vanished from public record. While the novel and screenplay are officially labeled fiction, the screenwriter Martin Sheen, when asked about the similarity, simply responded, "Sometimes fiction comes from the file drawer." Critics at the time praised the film's restraint, but others pointed out its eerie silences, the way it asks more than it answers, and how it never confirms exactly what the girl did or didn't do. Perhaps that's the most horrifying part. How easily a lie becomes a home. If the line between fact and fiction feels thinner now, you're not alone. Horror doesn't need monsters when reality offers something far more unsettling. If you enjoy peeling back the layers of forgotten films and buried truths, consider joining us again. There are still so many shadows Hollywood doesn't want you to see.